The heavy iron gates creaked open, revealing a driveway lined with trimmed hedges and tall lamps that glowed faintly. Under the fading sun, a sleek black car rolled forward, its tires crunching against the gravel until it came to a stop before the grand steps of the mansion. Diana sat inside, clutching her handbag tightly to her chest, her heart thudding against her ribs. It wasn't the first time she had arrived for a new job, but something about this place, with its towering pillars and polished windows, made her uneasy. Wealth had its own kind of silent scold, vast and unforgiving. When the driver let her out, Diana stood still for a moment, staring at the enormous house. Behind those walls lived people whose lives she couldn't imagine, whose routines were nothing like her own. She reminded herself why she had come: work, stability, and perhaps, if she was lucky, a place where she could belong, even if just as the one who cleaned the rooms and dusted the furniture. But before she could take a step toward the door, a sound drifted through the air, a sound that made her feet freeze on the marble steps. It was faint, muffled by walls and distance, yet piercing enough to reach her heart. A child's cry. Not the kind of cry that came from scraped knees or a broken toy. This was different. It was sharp, aching, almost desperate. Her fingers tightened on her bag. Something inside her whispered, "Go back, you don't want to be involved." But another part of her, stronger and louder, urged her forward. She knocked at the door, and a kind-faced older woman appeared. "You must be Diana," she said with a weary smile. "Come in." The warmth of the house did little to ease the chill Diana felt from that cry. "Who was that?" she asked before she could stop herself. The woman sighed, closing the door behind them. "That would be the little one. Don't worry, she'll settle down." But Diana could not forget the sound. As she followed the woman through polished corridors and rooms filled with expensive art, her ears strained for another hint of it. And there it was again, faint but unmistakable, echoing faintly from upstairs, a sob that seemed to claw its way through the walls. "Her name is Emily," the woman explained when she caught Diana glancing upward. "She's 7, sweet child, but life hasn't been kind to her." Her tone softened, but her eyes revealed years of helplessness. "She has special needs, and with her father always away for business, she doesn't get much of the attention she deserves." Diana's heart clenched. She knew what it was like to grow up without comfort, without a steady hand to guide you. "And her mother?" she asked quietly. "Gone. Passed when Emily was still a baby," the woman said, her voice hushed. "Since then, it's just been Emily, her father," and she hesitated, pressing her lips together before continuing. "And the stepmother." A loud slam echoed from above, making both women flinch. The sobbing stopped, cut off as though swallowed by fear. The older woman gave Diana a look that was both caution and warning. "You'll have your hands full here. If you're the kind who gets attached, be careful." Diana nodded, but her thoughts were far from careful. She couldn't shake the image forming in her mind, a little girl, alone in a grand room, her tiny shoulders shaking as she cried into her knees. Later, when Diana was shown to her quarters, she found herself unable to rest. Her eyes kept wandering toward the stairs, where shadows stretched long and thin. Finally, unable to resist, she climbed step by step, her hand trailing lightly along the railing. At the top, she paused, listening. Silence, but silence often carried secrets. She walked down the hallway until she reached a door faintly cracked open. A dim light spilled out. She raised her hand and knocked softly. "Hello, may I come in?" At first, nothing, then a small sniffle. Diana eased the door open. Inside, the room was large but cold, filled with toys neatly arranged, but untouched, as if they were decorations rather than belongings. Near the window sat a little girl with brown hair falling over her face, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The sight tugged at Diana's soul. She knelt down, keeping her voice gentle. "Hi there. I'm Diana. What's your name?" The girl looked up slowly, her eyes red from crying. "Emily," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name." Diana said softly, "Emily, do you mind if I sit here with you?" The girl hesitated, then gave a small nod. Diana sat cross-legged on the carpet, leaving just enough space so Emily didn't feel trapped. "Do you like stories?" Diana asked after a pause. Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Sometimes." "Well, I like stories very much," Diana said with a small smile. "And I think every person has a story, even you. Would you tell me a little piece of yours?" Emily's lip trembled. For a moment she said nothing. Then she pointed to her stomach. "Hungry," she murmured. Diana's breath caught. "When was the last time you ate, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged. "Morning, maybe." It was already late afternoon. A lump formed in Diana's throat. "Come with me," she said, extending her hand. For a moment Emily looked at it, as if she didn't quite believe it was meant for her. Then, slowly, she placed her small hand into Diana's. The warmth of that touch sparked something in Diana's chest, a bond forming in the silence of that moment. Together, they walked down to the kitchen, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. Diana prepared a simple meal: bread, soup, fruit. Emily sat on a stool, her legs swinging as she watched intently, as though afraid the food might disappear before it reached her. When Diana set the plate before her, Emily's face lit up with such innocent gratitude that it nearly broke Diana's heart. "Thank you," she whispered before eating with quiet eagerness. "You're very welcome," Diana replied softly, her eyes glistening. She thought of the warning she'd been given earlier: "Be careful if you get attached." But as she watched Emily smile between bites, Diana knew it was already too late. Something was wrong in this house, something that no amount of polished marble or expensive paintings could cover. And Diana, though she had come only to work, felt an unshakable certainty rising within her. She could not stand by and do nothing. She didn't know it yet, but that single moment offering food to a hungry child was the beginning of a story that would change every life inside that mansion forever. The night settled over the mansion like a velvet curtain, quiet yet heavy with a silence that didn't feel peaceful. Diana lay awake in her small room on the far side of the house, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts kept circling back to Emily, her fragile smile, the way she had clutched Diana's hand, the hunger in her eyes that no child should ever know. She tried to convince herself to rest. This was only her first day, and there would be plenty of challenges ahead. But something gnawed at her, a restlessness she couldn't shake. She had seen too much in just a few hours: a lonely child, a household that seemed polished on the surface but cracked underneath. Suddenly, a faint sound reached her ears. It was distant, muffled by walls, but unmistakable: the soft whimper of a child. Diana sat upright, heart pounding. Emily, she slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and crept into the hallway. The mansion seemed even larger. At night, the shadows stretching long and dark across the polished floor. She followed the sound carefully, step by step, until she reached the familiar door. The cry had quieted now, replaced by silence. Diana tapped lightly. "Emily, it's Diana, can I come?" In a pause. Then, barely audible, "Yes." Diana opened the door gently. Emily was curled on the bed, her small body trembling under the covers. The moonlight streaming through the curtains painted her face in silver light, and Diana's heart twisted at the sight. She crossed the room and knelt beside the bed. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Emily's voice was a whisper. "Bad dream. Alone." Diana smoothed the hair from her forehead. "You're not alone anymore. I'm here." Emily blinked up at her, uncertain, as though she had heard promises before that had never been kept. "Promise?" she asked in a shaky voice. "Promise," Diana said firmly. The little girl's trembling eased, and after a while, her breathing slowed into sleep again. But Diana stayed there, sitting beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest. She couldn't bring herself to leave. Something about Emily's presence pulled her in, as though fate had placed her in this house for a reason she didn't yet understand. As dawn began to break, Diana finally slipped back to her own room. She didn't sleep. Her thoughts were too heavy. The next morning, the mansion was alive with activity. The stepmother, a striking woman with an air of control, floated through the halls issuing instructions with sharp precision. Her voice was smooth, polite when needed, but Diana couldn't miss the coldness underneath. When she passed by Emily, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Emily, stand up straight," she said with a hint of irritation. And fix your hair. You must look presentable." Emily lowered her gaze and nodded silently. Diana, who had been dusting a table nearby, clenched her cloth in her hand. She wanted to say something, but she bit her tongue. Speaking too soon could cost her this job. But later, when they were alone, Emily whispered, "She doesn't like me." Diana crouched down beside her. "That can't be true." "It is," Emily said firmly, her little voice full of quiet certainty. "She doesn't like when I talk, doesn't like when I play. She says I make the house messy." Diana's chest ached. "Well, I like when you talk, and I'd love to see you play." A small smile tugged at Emily's lips, the first genuine smile Diana had seen. That afternoon, Emily led her into the garden at the back of the mansion. It was vast, filled with roses, hedges trimmed into perfect shapes, and a fountain that sparkled in the sunlight. For once, Emily's eyes brightened. She skipped toward the flowers, touching the petals lightly as though they were treasures. "This is my favorite place," she said. "Here, I can breathe." Diana smiled. "It's beautiful, just like you." The girl looked at her in surprise, as though no one had ever told her that before. Then she ran to pick a small flower and held it out. "For you." Diana took it gently. Her eyes stinging with tears, she quickly blinked away. "Thank you, Emily. I'll keep it forever." But their peaceful moment shattered when the stepmother's voice rang out from the balcony. "Emily, get inside at once. You'll ruin your dress in the dirt." Emily's face fell, the joy draining out of her as she shuffled back toward the house. Diana's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She knew now more than ever that Emily needed someone who truly saw her. That night, Diana returned to Emily's room to check on her again. The girl was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a book in her lap. When she saw Diana, she lit up. "Will you read with me?" she asked hopefully. Diana nodded and sat beside her. They read together, Emily stumbling over some words but eager to learn. Every time she got one right, Diana praised her, and Emily's face glowed with pride. "You're very smart," Diana said warmly. Emily shook her head. "She says I'm not." "Then she's wrong," Diana said firmly. "You are clever, kind, and stronger than you know." Emily's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. "Stronger?" "Yes," Diana whispered. "You've lived through things most people couldn't. That makes you stronger than anyone realizes." Emily hugged the book tightly, as if holding onto Diana's words. "I wish you could stay forever." Diana swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'll stay as long as I can." As the night deepened, Diana knew that something inside her had shifted. She had come here for work, but she couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't just a job. This was a calling, and though she didn't know what storms lay ahead, she silently vowed one thing: she would protect Emily, no matter the cost. The days that followed seemed to melt into one another, yet every moment felt heavier with unspoken truths. Diana settled into her duties, polishing the marble floors, tidying rooms that were already too perfect, arranging flowers that never seemed to brighten the atmosphere of the house. Yet in between the endless chores, her thoughts always drifted back to Emily. Every chance she could, she checked on the girl. Sometimes it was just a quiet glance into the playroom. Other times it was sitting with her during meals to make sure she actually ate. Slowly, Emily began to open up, her shy laughter echoing through the halls like music long forgotten. It warmed Diana's heart, but at the same time, it unsettled her. For every smile she drew out of Emily, there was an answering shadow: the sharp voice of the stepmother, the disapproving glances, the quiet reprimands that reminded Emily she was never truly wanted. One afternoon, Diana was polishing the silverware in the dining room when she heard raised voices upstairs. Her heart thudded. She recognized Emily's frightened tone, pleading for something. Without thinking, she set down her cloth and hurried toward the staircase. Halfway up, she froze. The stepmother's voice rang out, sharp and impatient. "Do as you're told, Emily. Don't argue with me." There was silence. Then Emily's soft cry. Diana clenched her fists. She wanted to rush in, but instinct told her to hold back. Charging in now would only draw suspicion. Instead, she waited at the corner until the stepmother's footsteps stormed away, echoing down the hall. When it was finally quiet, she slipped inside Emily's room. The little girl sat on the edge of her bed, hugging her doll tightly, her eyes red and swollen. "Oh, sweetheart," Diana whispered, rushing to her side. "What happened?" Emily shook her head, trying to be brave, but her lip trembled. She said, "I don't belong here." Diana's chest tightened. She knelt down, holding Emily's small hands in her own. "Don't you ever believe that. This is your home. You belong in this world as much as anyone, and you are precious." Emily stared at her, eyes wide with silent longing. Slowly, she leaned forward, resting her head against Diana's shoulder. For a moment, Diana just held her, feeling the fragile heartbeat of a child who had been denied comfort for too long. That night, Diana couldn't sleep. She sat at her small desk with the dim lamp casting a glow over her notes. She had started writing little reminders, things Emily had said, moments of joy she wanted to remember, promises she intended to keep. Each line was a quiet vow to herself that she would not allow the child to be forgotten or mistreated again. Still, she wondered about the girl's father. Why was he so absent? Did he truly know what was happening under his own roof? Did he understand how starved for affection his daughter was? The thought unsettled her. A parent's love was meant to be unwavering, and yet Emily seemed to live in a world where her only true comfort came from a stranger who had just arrived. The following morning, an unexpected event shook the routine of the house. A phone call came, urgent, formal. The stepmother took it. In the study, her voice low but tense. Soon after, the house buzzed with preparation. The master of the house was returning. Diana caught fragments of conversation as she passed in the hall. The stepmother's words were tight, almost rehearsed. "Yes, everything is fine here. Emily is well cared for. Of course she's happy." But Diana knew better. Emily herself seemed torn between excitement and fear. "Papa's coming," she asked in a small voice when Diana tucked her hair behind her ear. "Yes, sweetheart," Diana said gently. "Are you happy about that?" Emily hesitated, then nodded quickly, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. I think he'll notice me this time." The words pierced Diana's heart. No child should have to wonder if their parent would notice them. She stroked Emily's hair softly. "Of course he will. How could anyone not notice you?" The evening came with a storm. Rain lashed against the tall windows as thunder rolled in the distance. The mansion's grand doors opened, and in stepped a tall man in a dark coat, his presence commanding. His eyes were sharp, his expression weary, but there was something about him, a shadow of grief. A man who carried too many burdens. Emily peeked from behind the staircase, clutching Diana's hand. Her small voice trembled. "That's Papa." Diana looked down at her, then at the man. For a brief moment, his gaze swept the hall, passing over the servants, pausing only briefly on his wife, who hurried to greet him with a polished smile. But he didn't notice the small figure peeking from behind the banister. Emily's grip tightened on Diana's hand. The stepmother was quick to fill the silence with pleasantries. "The house has been well taken care of. Everything is in order. Emily is, well, she's doing as best as can be expected." Diana's stomach churned at the casual dismissal. As best as can be expected. Emily was not a burden. She was a child, a precious one. It wasn't until later that evening, when the house quieted after dinner, that Emily dared to approach her father. She stood at the edge of the study door, her small frame trembling with anticipation. Diana watched from the shadows, her heart aching with hope and fear for the little girl. "Papa," Emily whispered. The man looked up from his papers, surprise flickering in his eyes. For a moment, he seemed unsure what to say. Then he forced a smile. "Emily, you've grown." The girl's face lit up, even at those simple words. "I missed you." His expression softened. But before he could respond, the stepmother appeared, interrupting with talk of business, of meetings, of matters far from the needs of a little girl. Emily's smile faded as quickly as it had come. Diana felt her chest tighten with silent frustration. She wanted to speak, to shout the truth that Emily needed her father, that she was starving for his love. But she held her tongue. For now, as she led Emily back to her room, the storm still raging outside, Diana made another silent vow. The father might be blind to what was happening, and the stepmother might try to hide it all, but she would not. And though she couldn't see the full path ahead, one thing was clear: the truth would not stay hidden forever. The days following the father's return were heavy with a tension Diana could feel in the very air. The mansion bustled with activity, but underneath the polished routines, something unsettled lingered. Emily walked with more hope in her steps, her small eyes searching every corner, as if waiting for her father to notice her fully, to stop and truly see her. Yet time and again, her hope was quietly stolen. The man was always occupied. Long meetings in his study, urgent phone calls, brief dinners where he barely spoke. When Emily tried to sit beside him, the stepmother would subtly usher her away, distracting him with conversations about investments and social obligations. Diana watched it all in silence, her heart aching at every missed opportunity. One morning, Diana entered the playroom to find Emily sitting by the window, her toy blocks untouched beside her. She was drawing on a piece of paper with crayons, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you making?" Diana asked gently, kneeling beside her. Emily held up the picture shyly. It was a family, 3 figures standing under a bright sun. One was tall, with dark hair. One was smaller, holding his hand. The third stood off to the side, smiling. "That's Papa," Emily said, pointing at the tallest figure. "That's me," her voice softened as she pointed to the third. "And that's you." Diana felt her throat tighten. "Where's your stepmother?" she asked softly. Emily paused, then shrugged. "I don't know. She doesn't like pictures." Diana folded the drawing carefully, as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. "It's beautiful, and I think it shows something very true. You're not as invisible as you think. Someone sees you." "I do." Emily smiled faintly, but Diana could see the longing in her eyes. She wanted her father to see her too. Later that evening, during dinner, Diana quietly observed the family dynamic. The table was long, almost absurdly, so with more food than anyone could possibly eat. The father sat at the head, the stepmother at his side. Emily was at the far end, so small against the grand chairs, her feet dangling above the floor. At first, the conversation was all business. The stepmother discussed charity galas, important names, investments. Diana served quietly, her ears tuned. To Emily's silence, the little girl barely touched her plate, her eyes fixed on her father. Finally, she gathered courage. "Papa, I made a drawing today." Her small voice cut through the clatter of silverware. The man looked up, slightly surprised. "A drawing?" Emily nodded eagerly. "Do you want to see it?" Before he could answer, the stepmother interjected with a laugh. "Oh, she spends hours scribbling. It's nothing important. Let's not bother him with children's play." Emily's shoulders slumped, her gaze falling to her plate. Diana clenched her jaw, but the father surprised her. "No," he said firmly, his tone sharper than expected. "I'd like to see it." Emily's eyes widened. She darted from her chair and ran to her room. Returning with the crumpled paper clutched tightly in her hands, she handed it to her father, who unfolded it carefully. For a moment, silence filled the room. The man stared at the simple drawing, his figure, Emily's small hand in his, and Diana's smiling face beside them. Something flickered across his eyes, a hint of confusion, maybe even guilt. "It's very nice, Emily," he said, his voice softer than before. Emily's face lit up, but Diana noticed how quickly the stepmother leaned in, her smile tight. "Yes, darling. It's adorable. Now, let's not distract Papa. He has a lot on his mind." The moment passed. Emily folded the drawing back into her lap, her smile dimming but not fading completely. Diana could see that even the smallest recognition meant the world to her. Later that night, as Diana prepared to leave the dining hall, she overheard voices from the study. The stepmother's tone was sharp, almost desperate. "She's becoming too attached to that Maid. It isn't healthy. You need to set boundaries, or you'll lose control of her." The father's voice was quiet but firm. "She's a child. She needs someone." "She has me," the stepmother insisted. Diana couldn't see his expression, but his silence stretched long before he finally spoke. "Does she?" The stepmother didn't answer. That night, Diana found Emily waiting for her in bed, wide awake. "Did he like it?" she whispered when Diana sat down beside her. "He loved it." Diana replied with certainty. And he noticed you, Emily. I could see it. The girl's eyes glimmered with hope. Do you think, one day, he'll stay? For me, Diana stroked her hair gently, her heart heavy with the weight of the promise she wanted to give. I think he's starting to understand just how special you are. And when people understand, they change. Emily smiled, her eyes drifting closed at last. Diana watched her sleep, her small hand still clutching the folded drawing. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Diana felt a spark of something unexpected. Maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to shift. The father had seen a glimpse of what was hidden all along, but deep down, she knew the stepmother wouldn't let go of control so easily, and whatever storm was coming, it would test them all in ways none of them could imagine. The mansion seemed quieter after that dinner, but Diana knew silence often carried storms waiting to break. The father had shown a glimpse of tenderness toward Emily, and that single moment was enough to unsettle the balance of the house. The stepmother's polished smile never faltered in front of him. Yet Diana could feel the sharpness behind her. Every glance, something was shifting, and the woman knew it. Over the next few days, the atmosphere grew tense. Emily, buoyed by her father's recognition of her drawing, followed him like a small shadow whenever she could. She would sit outside his study with her crayons, glancing up every time the door opened. She would peek into the dining hall to see if he noticed her new sketches. And though he was often buried in work, Diana began to notice subtle changes. He lingered longer when Emily spoke. He asked small questions about her day. Once, Diana even caught him quietly watching as Emily laughed with her in the garden. His expression unreadable but softer than before. The stepmother noticed too, and she didn't like it. One afternoon, Diana was in the kitchen preparing a snack for Emily when the stepmother entered, her heels clicking against the tiles. "I'll take that," she said smoothly, reaching for the tray of fruit. Diana hesitated. "Emily hasn't eaten since breakfast. She asked me, she'll eat." "When I say she'll eat," the woman cut in sharply, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Don't overstep your role, Diana. You're here to clean, not to raise children." Diana lowered her gaze, but her hands trembled as she set the tray down. The stepmother swept it up and left, leaving the kitchen colder than before. That evening, Emily sat quietly in her room, her stomach growling softly as she played with her doll. Diana brought her a small piece of bread hidden in her apron pocket. Emily's eyes lit up as though it were a feast. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging her tightly before nibbling at the bread. Diana brushed a strand of hair from her face, her chest tightening. This wasn't just neglect, it was control, a way of dimming a child's light, and it made her all the more determined to protect her. The following day brought another shift. The father announced he would be working from home for the week. The news spread through the household like a ripple. Emily's face lit up with pure joy, while the stepmother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. For Diana, it meant something else entirely. It meant the truth might finally have a chance to reveal itself. The first sign came in the garden. Emily was showing Diana how she had learned to arrange flowers by color. When her father appeared unexpectedly, watching from a distance, he remained still, almost hidden by the archway. As Emily giggled and proudly held up a bouquet of mismatched blossoms, "Papa," she cried. Spotting him, she ran to him, thrusting the flowers into his hands. For a moment, he just stared, his polished composure cracking as he looked at his daughter's eager face. Slowly, he took the flowers and knelt down. "They're beautiful, Emily. Thank you." Her smile stretched so wide that Diana felt tears prick her eyes. She had waited so long for those words, but the moment was short-lived. The stepmother appeared, her tone falsely sweet. "Darling, you'll ruin your father's suit with all that dirt. Go wash your hands at once." Emily's smile faltered, but she obeyed. Diana noticed, however, that the father's gaze lingered on her even as she walked away. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. That evening, Diana heard raised voices again, this time from behind the closed doors of the study. "She spends too much time with that maid," the stepmother hissed. "You're letting her think this is normal. And what's wrong with that?" the father replied. His tone clipped. "Diana treats her with kindness. She's happier than I've ever seen her." She's confusing the child, the stepmother. Shot back, if you let this continue, you'll lose her respect. Your own daughter won't even listen to you anymore. There was a pause. Then the father's voice, quieter, almost pained. Maybe it isn't respect I'm losing. Maybe it's something I should have given her all along. The argument ended abruptly, footsteps storming past Diana in the corridor. The stepmother's expression, when she spotted her, was enough to send a chill down her spine. That night, Diana stayed by Emily's side longer than usual. They whispered stories under the glow of a small lamp, creating worlds far away from the mansion's walls, worlds where little girls were cherished and free to laugh as loudly as they wished. But even as she tucked Emily in, Diana felt the weight of the stepmother's gaze lingering in the shadows. Something dangerous was brewing. The next day, it happened. Diana was scrubbing the floors when the stepmother entered with an air of force. "Come, Diana, I think it's time we reevaluated your position here. You've grown too close to Emily. It isn't healthy, for her, or for you." Diana's heart dropped. "With respect, Mum, Emily needs stability. She needs someone to. She needs discipline." The woman cut in coldly. "And you are not her mother. Do not mistake kindness for authority." Before Diana could respond, a voice rang out from the hallway, deep, firm, undeniable. "Enough." The father stood there, his eyes sharp, his expression darker than Diana had ever seen. He looked from his wife to Diana, and then to the small figure clutching the banister behind him, Emily, wide-eyed and trembling, who had heard everything. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, the truth was no longer hidden in whispers or shadows. It stood in the open, fragile but undeniable. And Diana knew in that instant the storm had finally broken. The silence, after his words pressed down on the room like a weight. Diana stood frozen. The stepmother's face drained of color for a moment before she forced a smile that no longer looked convincing. Emily clung to the banister, her small hands trembling as though she feared what might come next. The father stepped forward, his gaze fixed on his wife. "I've heard enough whispers, enough excuses. Tonight, I saw the truth in my daughter's eyes." His voice was controlled, but beneath the calm surface was something raw, something long buried that was finally surfacing. The stepmother tried to recover, her tone honeyed but cracking at the edges. "Darling, you're misunderstanding. I only want what's best for Emily." "The maid, her name," he interrupted sharply, "is Diana. And it seems to me she has shown more care for my daughter than anyone else in this house." Emily's grip on the banister loosened as she gazed at her father, her lips parting in disbelief. For the first time, his words felt like a shield, not a distance. The stepmother's mask slipped, her voice tightening. "She's filling Emily's head with nonsense, making her defiant, ungrateful." "Stop." His command cut through the air. "You call kindness defiance. You call hunger discipline. You've treated her illness as a flaw instead of seeing her strength." He drew a long, steady breath, his eyes hardening. "I was blind, but I'm not blind anymore." Diana felt her own breath catch in her throat. The walls that had stood between father and daughter were crumbling, brick by brick, and it was Emily's tears that had begun the breaking. The stepmother's composure finally shattered. "You're going to believe a maid and a child over me," she spat, her voice sharp with panic. "After everything I've done, everything you've done is exactly what I cannot ignore any longer." He said firmly. Emily, as if summoned by courage, rushed down the stairs and pressed herself into Diana's arms. Her small voice trembled but carried a power far greater than her years. "Papa, she hurts me." "Diana helps." The words hung in the air, simple but undeniable. The father closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of regret pressing heavily against his chest. When he opened them again, they glistened not with anger, but with resolve. He stepped closer, crouching to meet his daughter's gaze. "Emily, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I should have seen. I should have protected you." His hand trembled as he brushed her hair back, and when she leaned into his touch, something inside him broke free, a tenderness he had long suppressed. The stepmother's protests grew weaker as he turned back to her. "You may have charmed me once, but you will not harm my daughter again. This house is hers, and she will be safe in it. If you cannot accept that, then you have no place here." The words struck like a final blow. She faltered, rage flashing in her eyes, but behind it was defeat. With a bitter scoff, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the echo of her footsteps fading into the night. The mansion was still, the kind of stillness that comes not from emptiness, but from the release of a storm. Emily looked up at her father, uncertain, as though afraid this moment would vanish like so many others before it. But he scooped her up into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go. "You're my little girl," he whispered, his voice breaking, "and I love you, exactly as you are." Emily buried her face against his shoulder, her small arms tightening around his neck. For the first time in her life, she believed him. Diana stood nearby, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. She had fought silently for this moment, every small act of kindness leading to this truth. Watching father and daughter finally bridge the chasm between them was more than she could have ever hoped for. But then, something unexpected happened. The father turned to her, his expression heavy with gratitude. "Diana, I don't know how to thank you. Without you, I may have lost her forever." Diana shook her head softly. "You don't need to thank me." Emily only needed someone to listen, to believe in her. "She's stronger than any of us realized." He studied her for a long moment, as though seeing her for the first time not as an employee, but as the quiet force that had changed everything. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion was no longer a place of cold walls and whispers. Laughter began to echo through its halls. Emily painted more, her drawings pinned proudly to the walls. She learned songs, read aloud with Diana, and sometimes, when her father had finished his work, he would join them in the garden, clumsy but earnest, picking flowers alongside his daughter. The neighbors noticed too. The once distant businessman was now seen strolling hand in hand with his little girl. His face softened, alive. And yet, despite the peace, Diana often wondered how long her place in this story would last. She was only a maid, after all, a passerby in their lives. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the father found her in the garden, kneeling beside Emily as she planted seeds. He watched quietly before speaking. "You've given my daughter more than I ever thought possible. You've given me more too. You reminded me what it means to be a father." Diana glanced up, startled by the warmth in his tone. He continued, his voice steady but carrying weight. "I don't want you to think of yourself as just someone who works here. You're part of this family now. If you'll stay, this will be your home as much as hers." Emily looked up at that moment, her hands dirty with soil, and cried out happily, "Diana stays forever." Diana felt her throat tighten. The path that had begun with a child's sobs behind a locked door had led here to belonging, to love, to hope. And though she didn't yet know what the future would bring, she understood one thing clearly. Their story was no longer one of silence and shadows. It was a story of courage, discovery, and a bond that had turned strangers into something unbreakable. The mansion's windows glowed with light that night, but brighter still was the small voice of a child, laughing freely, finally unafraid.